Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Ben Stewart podcast. I'm really excited about this episode because we're going to be talking about something that I've been nerding out on for some time, and that's the physical body. It's understanding a deeper, more intuitive, and communicative level of the human body and how we interface with it. So our guest today, as an ex-professional athlete who overcame a career-threatening injury with alternate treatments, Sean has personal experience of how holistic approaches to healthcare can provide benefit to people. Sean Johnson is a natural therapist clinician, helping a broad demographic of humans understand and navigate various modern lifestyle ailments by combining different therapeutic approaches to healthcare. With a BA degree in psychology and anthropology, and honors in psychology for applied context, a qualified teacher, ultra marathon runner, as well as various natural therapeutic qualifications, he treats, speaks, and provides insights on various topics from managing stress, optimizing health, and ways to maximize the human potential in personal and corporate spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, can't wait for this one. Let's get Sean Johnson in here on the Ben Stewart podcast. My man, Sean, how are you doing today?
Ben, good in yourself.
Doing real well, man. Doing real well. So you are hailing from South Africa, correct?
That's right, Johannesburg. So I think it's 5 p.m. your time. It's 11 p.m. my time. Yeah.
11 p.m. Right on.
Mm.
Yeah. So, dude, thank you so much for coming on the program. And I'm excited to talk about the human body. I guess like a great launching point would be, at what point for you did the body and the way that we treat let's say the musculoskeletal structural integrity, just the love for the body, when did that start for you?
I think it's always pretty much been, quite a fascinating thing for me. Growing up, I was an overweight child. Could probably still consider myself that. I battled with a couple of things when I was younger. My knees, my lower back, even through school. But, back then, you were pretty much treated, in a traditional sense. So a physiotherapist or, I didn't even really have much exposure to chiropractic work when I was growing up. And then when I was 25, in my second year as a professional rugby player, I herniated a disc in my back. And I didn't respond to conventional treatment. And, I'd been playing rugby in Australia, and I came back to South Africa. And as I said, I didn't respond to conventional treatment. And my next option was surgery, and I was hesitant. I didn't want to go that route. I was 25 at the time. The surgeon said to me, "Look, my career's over. You'll never play again." And I was obviously devastated, but I didn't want surgery, and so I just said, "Look, I'm going to try and sort it out myself." And in that time, my mom phoned me and said, "Look, she's read an article on something called Bowen therapy," and I said, geez, what a coincidence. I've heard about this stuff playing in Australia. I'd come across it, but I'd never been for treatment there. And long story short, I went for treatment, never had back surgery. I went back to playing rugby. I played for another 5 years or 6 years and then retired because I was just, tired. And I was so taken by it because it was really like sort of light touch and treated the body in a very holistic sense. And so I started studying it part-time because I literally, I didn't understand it, it didn't make sense to me. And so I qualified. And when I retired from rugby, it's kind of, I coached for 2 years, which I didn't really enjoy. And so, as we were just chatting off air about 10 years ago, I said to my wife, "Look, this is what I should be doing with my life. This is my calling." And kind of went into it full time. because the previous 6 years before that, I'd been working part-time in it, not as a profession. So that's my sort of short story into how I do what I do now.
So what was it one defining hit that
Mm.
herniated that disc? It was
Look,
probably chronic
mm,
over time, but just
yeah,
curious, was there
I
one
was
defining
actually,
injury?
no, I was, it was pre-season testing. I was squatting in the gym with a lot of weight. That was probably a little bit too heavy for me at the time. But also, my life, I was, kind of going through a lot emotionally, uh, even sort of different things going on in my life. And, looking back now, the work that really needed to be done, along with the physical, and I did do it, was the sort of emotional release of things,
Mm.
and I'd always had an understanding of the mind affects the body, but yeah, I had a first-hand experience of it. For me to discover and understand exactly how everything is so intertwined. And at the time, I can remember having a conversation with my sister, and she said, "Oh, and this was before I discovered, my panacea of Bowen therapy." My sister said, "Look, everything happens for a reason." And I was like, "I'm gonna hear this, like Mama Jumbo," you know.
Yeah.
But to be fair, looking back, perhaps perhaps those sort of year and a half I spent playing rugby in Australia was simply to hear those words, Bowen therapy. Who knows?
Wow. So I want to hear a little bit more about how it connected for you emotionally. Like what was the impetus for an emotional release? Like what at what point did it just smack you over the head? These two things, the physical body and your mental emotional state are super entwined. What was that for you?
Look, I always had it's very different having a notion of idealism versus the pragmatism. So, I'd studied and read a lot of stuff on, how the mind interplays with the body and that sort of stuff. I think, to be fair, I was carrying quite a bit of sort of, I don't know what the correct word or term would be, but sort of family lineage, karmic type stuff.
Yeah, trauma,
That I
that epigenetic trauma that
There we go.
transcends.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, I like that. And so, along with with bone therapy, it was like a really big awakening for me. And so when I qualified and I started my clinical work, even the part-time stuff, when people would come in, and even to this day, people come in and they say, "I've got back pain, I've got knee pain, I've got," and great, I gather that. But what I'm looking for is, what's the story the nervous system is telling? Because
Mm.
we all have egoic stories, which is great, how we define ourselves, and it gives us sort of navigation point in the world. But underneath who you are, there's a nervous system that's processing stuff from your subconscious that you might not even be aware of. And sometimes all it takes is just joining the dots for people, making them aware of what's really going on, because people will come in with back pain, and just as an example, and they're going through a divorce, they've just lost a business, they've lost a spouse, it doesn't matter. But that stress of that, and I mean that, I can discuss the physical mechanics of it. The stress of that is actually, what's giving them the back pain. And the medical fraternity might sort of frown upon that sort of view, but uh, you know some things are true whether you want to acknowledge them or not. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was just reading Oneness versus the 1%, Vandana Shiva, and what's interesting, what the parallel between one part where she's talking about empirical reductionism,
Yeah.
which is reductionism is okay if you understand the limits of what it is that you're deducing. You're deducing like, well, every time this rooster and this hen get together, like it fertilizes the eggs, and that's empirical reductionism. Whereas fundamental reductionism is assuming you know the way the world works. It's making a statement that reality is this. And it kind of seems that the medical world, they've made that statement that nothing is true until we, the authorities, have
Yeah.
discovered the metrics by which we can explain it. And
Sure. And
I've experienced back pain, and radiating pain in ways where I've also noticed this is definitely attached to a story. Now I've had back pain from injury as well, but I've definitely connected those dots before. And when I don't really do like hands-on physical training with people, but I have had clients before that have had back pain, and one of them was asking like, I've had this debilitating back pain for a while. There's no injury. There's no explanation for it. I don't get it. I just want it to go away. And I remember telling him, I was like, well, have you sat with it and engaged with it as if it was a messenger that you're not just going to throw out of your house until you have an answer, right? That's like telling the messenger to leave before you delivered the message, just because you don't want to deal with the pain of the obvious truth of whatever message they're giving you. Have you noticed, and is there like a through line? And I definitely want to get into like what are the specifics of Bowen therapy, what makes Bowen therapy
mm,
Bowen therapy, but like I also want to know like is there a specific through line for people that you notice like, okay, this definitely isn't an injury and the pain isn't aligning with the story they're telling me.
mm.
I have to go deeper into the psyche rather than the body.
Yeah, look, you know, mind and the body are sort of two opposite poles, and they're expressing each other constantly. And so I would say, they say anyone can make up figures, but I'd say maybe 80% of what I treat in clinic is the cause is non-physical. So whether it's emotional stuff, whether it's chemical stress, so exposure to toxins in the environment, unhealthy diets, too much electromagnetic radiation, whatever it is, it's just kind of manifesting. And sometimes, to establish causality is difficult.
Hmm.
But most of the time, let me quickly give you if you will indulge me, the mechanics of what's going on around, you've seen the fascia.
Mhm.
So fascia is like the connective tissue, the cobwebs of the body, right? That allows fluid movement. The fascia around the brain and spinal cord, you have three layers: the arachnoid, the pia mater, and the outer one is called the dura mater. It translates as tough mother. Dura, that's where endurance comes from, and mater, mother. The same structure in Chinese medicine is called the governing vessel, and their literature says it governs all systems of yin and yang in the body.
Hmm.
There's a reason Hippocrates said in cases of disease, look first to the spine, because this piece of connective tissue, all the other fascia connects into this,
Yeah.
the meninges, right? So
Hmm.
it attaches in particular places. So in the lower spine, in the sacrum and the coccyx, and then higher up in the neck and the sphenoid bone. A lot of people don't know what the sphenoid bone is, so it's pretty much the jaw, you know. And so in South Africa, we've got, you get centipedes all over the world, but we've got black centipedes that the Zulu vernacular for a centipede is shongololo. And so when people come into clinics, I explain it like this. I say, when you touch a shongololo, it will spiral, it curls into a ball. Most vertebrates have this reflex. So dogs curl their tail between their legs, hedgehogs curl into a ball, pangolins will curl into a ball. We have that exact same response, believe it or not. So the dura, to protect the brain and spinal cord, because this is its job, it's highly sensitive, it will tighten down in the sacrum and the coccyx, and then up at the top in the neck and the jaw. And what it does in doing so is it actually lengthens itself. It'll stretch itself between 5 and 8 centimeters. And this allows us to put ourselves into a flexion state. So we actually, fetal position would probably be
Mhm.
the best way without me demonstrating it. And so the thing is, the nervous system putting itself into that state, yes, you can be injured. So you get physical, emotional, and chemical stress. Those are the three stresses. Physical is, I have too many glasses of wine and I fall down the stairs and I wake up with a sore back. That's physical, external trauma on the body. Chemical, we've kind of discussed, it's exposure to toxins or, living in polluted environments. But a large majority, because we are so stuck in our heads, is generated. The dura folds itself as a result of emotional or cognitive neural stress. And so, the really fascinating thing is if you take a posture that's and this is kind of like polyvagal theory, if you take a posture that's in a sympathetic state, so in other words, flexion, that the shongololo is curled into a ball, and you change it, you loosen the dural attachment sites and you get it into extension, the nervous system creates a state shift. So you go from fight or flight into rest and relax, sympathetic into parasympathetic, just by creating that posture change. And so, people say to me, do you treat just anxiety and depression? And I go, well, indirectly, yes. I would never claim to say, look, I'll fix your anxiety or whatever. But most of these diseases or, sort of lifestyle modern diseases are created because we just have an overload of stress. We have, a nervous system that's stuck in a sympathetic state. It won't, or we don't give it enough time to shift back into a parasympathetic state. So again, we can make up figures, but I would say a large majority, I'd say about 80% is cognitive stress that's just kind of showing up in the body as back pain or insomnia or hormonal issues or knee pain. It's symptoms are symptoms. There's a reason they're called symptoms. You've got to figure out what's root cause, or at least, have a crack at figuring out what's really going on in the body.
Yeah, I I appreciate what you're saying there. And what's interesting is, so I've communicated with this woman, Frankie Burgett. She's down in, I think it's Dallas, Texas. She worked with the myofascial system, but she noticed that people's gait cycle, when they're not functional, she was noticing that she was dealing with a lot of TMJ.
Yeah.
And then she also mentioned the sphenoid bone, and her and this other researcher, Cullen Smith, was talked about the occult anatomy of the sphenoid bone, which is really interesting. If you pull up Gordon, the sphenoid bone, and take a look at one of the images of it, SPH.
Gotcha.
Yeah, right there. And you take a look at this thing. It's interesting because it kind of looks like either an owl coming at you or a moth or something like this. And this is the most complex bone in the human body.
Yeah, I think sphenoid. I'm not sure. I think sphenoid translates as winged bat in Greek.
Yeah,
and if
like
you
a
look at
bat.
it
looks like
does
that.
look like that. Yeah.
And it flexes
The
its
sphenoid
wings
virus.
as well. You you might be able to find. So right there, the audience can see where the sphenoid bone sits, and just imagine with proper gait cycle, that thing should flex and move. And this is at least what Frankie Burgett was saying, that movement because what sits on top of that in this groove called the sella turcica is the pituitary and pineal complex. And so what she's saying is there's this kind of almost palpating or milking action that goes on, that your walking and your gait cycle actually help downstream through the rest of the endocrine system, because that's the master endocrine gland. And what she noticed is that with improper gait cycle, that the sphenoid bone kind of seizes. It stops to flex in a way, and it stops creating that that motion to the pituitary. So there's actually hormonal and endocrine issues that she has noticed, that the last place you would think is a bone in the body, and then thinking that bone is affected by the way that you walk, the placement of the feet, all these kinds of things. So when you're mentioning posture, I've noticed this as well. Amy Cuddy said 2 minutes of arms above head lowers cortisol, the stress hormone, and raises testosterone. How is it that posture for 2 minutes can radically shift the ratios of neurochemicals in your body? And then think of the fact that what's throwing a lot of our posture out of balance I'm making one big solid guess here. One big part of it is we are a sitting culture, more so
Yeah.
than ever before in history. We're a sitting culture. So we have this, over exaggeration of the hyperkyphosis that's been setting into the body, which is the rounded back and everything like that. With that being said, like, where do you start? I want to know a little bit more about the Bowen therapy. So somebody
So
comes in and you can tell that they have the hyperkyphosis in their posture, and regardless of what they say, like, where do you start based on your intuition?
Well, I do a couple of tests, very brief, simple tests, and I just have a look at. So if you think about it, there's a contraction at the bottom, and I can even explain the gait cycle, how like your coccyx, believe it or not, is paired with the sphenoid bone. So if I take your coccyx and I shift it or I create tension in it, it's mirrored up at the top. The sphenoid bone mirrors that, and so that's why when I'm working with women, I think we chatted off air. I don't think this was on, but if we're trying to get a woman to give birth naturally, drug-free, whatever, the jaw, making sure the sphenoid bone is loose is more important than making sure the pelvis is loose. It's not more important. It's just there's more dural attachment in the upper attachments, and so generally dysfunction is descending. So issues in the knees, and I mean, there's if you go into PubMed.com now, there's published medical papers saying medial knee pain is often TMJ dysfunction.
Wow.
So I just do a couple of tests to see who's winning the tug of war battle. Is it the lower durals, the upper durals, and most of the time it's the upper durals, because our brain sits there. It's we have as I said, so many dural attachments in that area. Our hormones are affected by it. Our lymphatic system, or the lymphatic system of the brain, is called the glymphatics.
Yep.
That needs to drain, and so generally, I kind of look at what's going on up there, and then clear that, and then we have a look at, okay, what's the rest of the body doing now? Because I don't want to. Again, anyone can make up figures, but when people come into the clinic, there are very few people that don't get some sort of neck and sphenoid work. Even if the testing shows me that it's clear, I do it anyway, because it's kind of like, I think the testing might be a little bit, giving me a false positive. Yeah. So, you get that right. That's sphenoid bone, and you change a lot of things. The brain actually uses it. It's a bit like a gyroscope. So the brain uses it to navigate you through a gravitational field. So the first place that things go wrong is neck and jaw, and then you get the symptoms around that. Generally, not always. There are exceptions to the rule. So we've all done it. You misstep. You try to sit in a chair and then you fall down onto your coccyx, and you get that like really bad ringing pain I always say it feels like toothache in your coccyx. And 3 days later you start to develop headaches, because what's happened is shifting the coccyx has created a shift in the sphenoid bone higher up. Just like the sacrum is paired with the occipital bone. If I shift the sacrum, I shift the occipital bone, right, which is sort of the base plate of the skull. And you mentioned that we are sitting society. The coccyx doesn't like direct pressure. So if you sit for long periods, the sacrum and the pelvis will adjust itself to take pressure off of the attachments down there via what's called the filum terminale. And so you change the bottom, you change what's going on up at the top. And, it's one of the things when I've treated people, I say, movement is your friend. In Chinese medicine, there's a saying, when there is movement, there is no pain. When there is no movement, there is pain. And so, we, as a species, we've evolved to move,
Yeah. You froze a second. Let's see if we get him back. While he's frozen, I just want to mention that, isn't it cool that the body mirrors itself in such a way that the sphenoid bone is mirrored in the coccyx? I think I mentioned it on the last podcast. It might have even been that above your diaphragm in your chest is like air, like the wind and the sun, your heart. And then below that is where all the water and the earth goes. Like they mirror each other at that diaphragm. And that's right where the vagus nerve becomes unmyelinated. There's a lot happening right there. Sean, are you still there?
It's as above, so below.
Ah, exactly.
Kind of a reflection. Having a little bit of technical difficulties. Bear with us, everyone.
South Africa difficulties.
I think he's rejoining. He just left. He might be rejoining.
There you go. Well, while he's rejoining, yeah, I just want to make that one last point that we are creatures meant to move. We're meant to move the body, and just think of the fact that we run waters through our body, through the fascia. Your fascia is 20% of your body weight. It's the one organ, because now it's being looked at as an organ, that actually connects every other system of the body. It's made of collagen, ground substance, elastin, and water. It moves a lot of that water, which holds memory, through the body, and it connects around the entire spinal column from the cranial to the sacral pump, which is what Sean was just talking about there. And Jaap van der Wal, who is a embryologist from the Netherlands, he tracks the entire evolution of embryology, like your fascia, the way it starts and how it evolves all the way to the moment that you leave this place, is an evolution of movement in the fascia. So there's something super fascinating about that. Do we have Sean back? Did he come back?
Not yet.
Not yet. I should just keep rambling. Well, why don't you pull up the imagery of...
Yeah, I can pull up his site.
Yeah, well, I would say pull up the imagery of the spinal column, like the full spinal column, all the way up to the brain stem.
Doing a live
because just for ladies and gentlemen, just for your kind of historic or mythological understanding of this instrument, the spinal column. I think Sean's rejoining.
Yeah, right, sorry, there. Ben. I'm not sure what happened there.
It's all good. Just the fact that we have technology. You're in South Africa. I'm in Nashville. Gordon over here is in Virginia. And you only took, a minute to get back on. I think I'm still applauding our advances. So all I was telling the audience was just how beautiful that the body mirrors itself in such a way. I don't know if you've thought of this, but like the diaphragm, above are the lungs and the heart, almost like the air and the sun, and below is where all the water and the solids go to in the digestive tract, where the soil and obviously the microbiota exist. There's kind of a mirroring there of our outside world, as much as there is a mirroring of our inside world. You said the coccyx and the sphenoid bone are mirrors of one another. I've seen that along the spinal column for quite some time, like as above, so below.
So below.
The hips, the cranium. And I was even just talking about how fascia, it's 20% of our body weight, and it's the one system that connects all other systems, and it primarily wraps itself around the spinal column. So in Bowen therapy, everything seems to kind of come back to like, well, first address what would be keeping the body from just naturally healing itself as well, which wouldn't be the blunt trauma, I would imagine. It would be the reason why you go up here is not because they told you there was some kind of neck or head or jaw injury. It's probably because the chronic, just day to day, seems to affect this more than any other spot in the body. So if you address that, even if that's not where the pain seems to be coming from, it's going to be a net positive anyway.
100%. And so it's kind of like, if you take, I always explain it like this to people. If I take a motor car and I take a wheel off, you could probably drive that car. It's not going to drive, at 120 k's an hour. But if I put the wheel back on, then it will drive at 120 k's an hour. It doesn't help. I'm trying to make the car go faster, but I haven't put the wheel back on. I'm not going to get anywhere, And so generally it's most issues, unless there's, blunt force trauma, if you've fallen down the stairs and you've torn knee ligaments, it's a very different injury to something that's accumulated this tension through the fascial network, and then you serve a tennis ball and your shoulder doesn't quite feel right after that. You've got to look for root cause dysfunction. What's really going on in the body, as opposed to like, well, what's the body presenting to me? Right. So great, the body's engine light comes on, and just like it does in a car, but I've got to do something to make the engine light go off, not just take the bulb of the red light out.
Right.
So people often come in and I explain, look, my work and this is, we spoke about reductionism earlier, and modern medicine is very reductionistic by nature, which is great because it allows us to study parts of the body and diseases and viruses down to the last like minute detail. But in its attempt to be reductionistic and to be science driven, it's lost its concept of how the body functions holistically, of how intertwined my emotions are, how how I'm affected by my environment, how I'm affected by my conditioning. And people come in and I'll say to them, you've got knee pain. I can tell you now, I'm going to spend a lot of time on your jaw, just so that they don't think, what the hell is this guy? This is the way I'm. And I've had it. Guys come in and they'll say, oh, my hip, and I'll have a look, and it's got nothing to do with the hips. Let's just say it's like stuck epidurals, and I'll release, and then I'll say, okay, well, come back next week. Let's see how you go. And they go, no, about my hip, and I go, I know. Just trust me. Come back.
You know where my hip is?
And then they'll come back. Yeah. They'll come back and they'll go, yeah, it's 95% better. And so, if we, I always use this example. If you have a garden and the flowers are dying, you can keep replanting flowers, but really, if you need to just add the bees back in, then that's what you must do. So.
It's understanding holistically.
That's it.
It's understanding that everything is a system connected in with a larger system. That's the one thing about the reductionism that I think goes too far. It's like, oh, let's keep getting smaller. Let's keep dissecting more and more. And it's like, that in and of itself is not the problem. The problem is it's not this thing that grows in all directions, like across the spectrum. It's like this thing that grows out in a line. Like, let's keep getting smaller. Let's keep reducing more and more and more. And I would imagine, in rugby, there's probably a lot of that. Like, the tire's off. I can't go any faster. We'll muscle through it. I remember back in football, there was a lot of this muscle through it. And it's just like, it's funny that more people didn't acknowledge it back then, but there were a lot of kids that I remember that their injuries got worse because we were just told, like, well, you just need to muscle up, stop crying so much about it. So I think the very last football game I ever played, I was playing running back, and I was playing Iron Man because I was also on defense. And while I was on defense, I tackled somebody, brought him down on my ankle, and injured my ankle. But I was so in it that I just kind of sat on the bench and I was waiting for my turn to get up again. And my dad was, one of the coaches. And I just told him, like, Dad, I'm ready to go back in. And I step and my ankle just rolls to the side. And that's when he's like, all right, I'm taking you to the hospital. But that was the mentality. I was just like, well, I'm just going to wait until I don't feel the pain as bad because I want to get back out there on the field and so I can muscle through it. And you literally came from that pro rugby style of probably thinking of things. And this is where I kind of want to dive deeper into Bowen therapy, because you're talking about it's soft touch. That kind of, most people think, no, I'm a hard man. I got a lot of muscles. It needs to be hard. I need to feel pain in order for something good to be happening. And also, I want to understand if Bowen therapy is similar to, or if it employs any myofascial release kinds of techniques.
Look, with Bowen therapy, it's predominantly sort of neurolymphatic. So it looks at the nerves, it works with the fascia, it works with the muscles and tendons and ligaments, and also sort of fluid dynamics in the body. What is the lymphatic system doing? So in terms of I wouldn't say it's myofascial release. There is elements of that, but it's more about re-establishing. Your fascial network is a communication network. So it's more about re-establishing it. It's kind of like showing the brain, this is what my posture should be. And so it uses very like sort of lightish, it depends how the technique's very forgiving. And so perhaps if I'm working with the baby, I use incredibly light touch. If I'm working with a more muscular athlete, it's not overly aggressive, but I might use a slightly deeper touch to kind of, get the desired effect. So I wouldn't say it's I suppose it's lumped together with myofascial release because people understand what that is. So it's easy just to explain it in that sense. There's kind of new theory saying that you can't actually release fascia. And so the release that you get is actually just a readjustment of the whole fascial network. Because the really interesting thing about fascia, it's kind of like liquid crystal in nature. So it's like your flat screen TV screen.
Yeah.
If I took a pin and I put a tiny hole in the top, I'm just looking at my TV across from me. Yeah. If I put a hole in the screen, the whole screen won't work. It's not like there's just a small bit that doesn't work. And so fascia is like that. It kind of responds as a whole, or it doesn't respond at all, which is really incredible.
Yeah, it's a fractal communication network. I've even heard that fascia doesn't stretch. There is elastin in it, but it actually reconfigures itself. It slides across itself and reconfigures in order to give the impression that it's stretching, when really what it's doing is, if you could see the cobwebs in there for the audience, imagine all those connector points can slide across one another and reconfigure itself in a fractal sense. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of what you're mentioning as well.
Yeah.
Like the idea of release maybe seems to be it's a communication that allows for the nervous system to go back into parasympathetic from sympathetic.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
100%. It's hard for me to put it into words, but to me, the fascial network of the body, almost, if you look at how a octopus moves in the water, like, with all its tentacles going, it's almost like it's got its own consciousness, for lack of a better term. I like to think that consciousness is sort of infused through the fascial network. A lot of people think your bones are what's holding you upright. So that's not true. Your fascial network is holding you upright. The bones are actually floating in the fascia. If your bones were holding you up, if you blacked out, you would remain upright because the bones would then be taking the tension. But because you black out, that neural tension, that consciousness isn't pushed through the fascial network. And so it's like dropping the current in an electrical circuit. You just collapse. And so it's a fascinating structure in terms of what it does, how it allows for fluid movement. I try to explain to people in clinic that the way dancers move so gracefully, or your ability to run or throw a ball in a very sort of fluid like way, is facilitated by the fascia. If that wasn't the case, if it was your muscles, you'd be very clunky. You'd kind of move like, I'm sure you've seen a cat with tape under its paws. That's how I think you would move without fascia. So it's really an interesting structure. And when they started, I'm not quite sure when, maybe the Renaissance era, or when they started really cutting open cadavers, they weren't really interested in the fascia because they were interested in the muscle and the organs and the bones, stuff they could really see. That they kind of just discarded it as this stuff.
Packing material.
That's right.
They did the same thing with the glia inside the brain. Neurons took I did a whole paper on this where it was two brothers. They were studying the brain, and one of them had this idea that neurons were the most important and that glia and all the rest is just packing material. And his brother wanted to, I think it was Ramos something. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but he wanted to get his name on the paper, so he rushed out there with that, published it, while his brother was rethinking, no, there's got to be a deeper purpose to this, which is the same thing. It's this packing material. So with cadavers, we're just like, what is this stretchy stuff? We got to get rid of it to get the good stuff, like the organs
That's
and
right.
the muscles.
Yeah, and you know, now I suppose there's more research coming out, but if your fascial system, I'm sure you know what osteopathy is.
Yeah.
But you know, Andrew Taylor Still, he said fascia by its, I'm paraphrasing, yeah, but fascia by its functioning we live, and by its dysfunction we die. You know, and so a healthy fascial network is and you also said, oh, you just mentioned nature a little bit earlier. He said osteopathy is nature. And so, you know, he took a very sort of natural approach to healthcare. And, you know, new research coming out saying if your fascial network is healthy, you will be healthy, you know, and if it's not, well, you're going to have some problems.
Yeah. I want to mention one more thing on this, on the fascia thing. You mentioned that it almost seems to have its own consciousness, or consciousness runs itself through it. I'm sure you've heard the conundrum of when something grazes across your foot and you can react to it faster than your nervous system would send the signal to the brain and back down for you to move it, which is nervous system 250 miles an hour, like let's say a fast Ferrari. But it almost seems, and I'm sure you've probably seen Ronell Wood's book, maybe it's called Freeing Your Fiber Optic Fascia, that when you look
No,
at,
but that seems like one I must get.
so check that out. I mean,
Yeah.
she it's not like she makes it into like a scientific paper proving its fiber optic quality, but you go to the first doctor to put a probe underneath the skin, Jean-Claude Gimberto, and strolling
Yes.
under the skin. And you
Yes.
can see that as you're looking at living fascia, not in a cadaver, but living tissue, it looks like fiber optic tissue. It looks like it's actually like sending biophotons and light, or at least capable of transmitting light, or somehow communicating fractally across its network quicker than the nervous system can. So I've heard this about the consciousness of it, that somehow it can get you to move your leg before your brain has even responded to something.
Yeah.
So perhaps
Again,
brain is only one element of what we consider to be intelligence. It swims in a much larger field of intelligence, or consciousness,
yeah.
whatever the proper word might be.
Well, I like to look at it as, you know, consciousness isn't just in the brain. You are consciousness, like everything. And I don't know, you know, the polyvagal theory kind of states
Stephen
that.
Porges.
That's right. Yeah. You know, if I create state shift in the body, I create state shift mentally. And, you know, this is kind of this like seesaw between mental and physical. And so I try explain to people, like, you want to be healthy, just move, and you don't have to. You spoke earlier about the gait cycle. Walking is just ideal. You know, you don't have to go to the gym, you don't have to, you just want to move, because the more you walk, the more your posture resets itself. And if I change posture, I change mental state, you know.
I've heard this
There
about
was
walking. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but
no.
have you heard of the Human Garage out of LA?
I have actually.
Check them out. There's this really good podcast they did. I'll try and think of the name of who interviewed them, but it was three of them. It was one guy who had just gotten a treatment from them interviewing the three. So it's that man you see in that picture, his wife, and they have somebody studying under him. It was such a good podcast, but one thing that I specifically remember them talking about was that walking, so like just natural, as we move throughout our day, it's common that your body torques itself. So the fascia starts to torque itself, as they said. There's probably more words we could place to that.
Sure,
but he said the number one exercise to untorque the body is walking. And he said, like, now if you were to walk 6 to 8 miles a day, you wouldn't have any torque in your fascia at all. But that's beyond what most people can find the time to do. So he said there are other manipulations and things you can do that are quicker, more to the point than walking 6 to 8, or it might have been 6 to 8 miles a day. I'm sorry, not 6 to 8 hours. That's a lot more doable. 6 to 8 miles a day, but still there's something about that natural bilateral movement is it really, if you think of what walking is, it's around the center line, the spine of the
Sure.
body. It's just these lateral movements, your transverse abdominis, which a lot of people have gotten very, atrophied with. Um, there's something that's not supporting their spine as well. And it seems like walking, you're getting a full range of motion around a neutral spine, or at least you're working in that direction. So I like what you said about the walking. I think that's a really good take-home tip.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke earlier about the dura mater, right? The outer protective covering of. So this attaches in sacrum and coccyx, and then neck and jaw. What you don't realize, every time you breathe, the diaphragm acts as a pump, and so your sacral bone and your ilium, they work antagonistically to each other, and then up at the top, the occiput and the sphenoid, they work. The temporal bones and the sphenoid bone, they work opposite to each other. And what this does is it circulates the cerebrospinal fluid and the lymphatic system. So if you have, we all carry a lot of tension in our diaphragm. We don't breathe like we should. So if my diaphragm is tight, I limit that moving of those bones, right? If as an example, I suffer a concussion, these bones jam up at the top, the dural attachment sites contract, it affects my breathing, right? And that in turn affects this rocking motion of the bones. So I would say walking is an excellent way to loosen those. So it makes complete sense,
Yeah. So let me just mine this a little bit more. I love that you mentioned the breathing, and maybe later, if it comes back up in the flow, I'd love to know if you recommend breathing exercises for people. But the one thing about the one question I have with walking is, I'm sure any way that you get in some walking would be great, but what are your thoughts on between wearing shoes and on flat surfaces, or barefoot out in the grass where there's all these little contours? And what are your thoughts on those minute variables that might actually help kind of loosen up what has become torqued?
Look, I'm sure there are other experts that could give you a better answer, but obviously barefoot would be ideal, right? We've got so many proprioceptors in our palms and underneath our the bottom of our feet, and so my oldest son, he didn't wear shoes until he was 4. My daughter, not so much, because she likes to dress up and she's much younger, but I understood the importance of this. And I think a lot of older people would not suffer, like hip breaks and falls and a loss of balance if they maintain that proprioception. So, I live in a city, being barefoot all the time is not ideal. But when I get a chance to get out, I love being barefoot. To me, it's and you can look at that concept of earthing, that exchange of free electrons, decreasing inflammation and changing the charge in the body. So, I mean, ideally, we've evolved as a running species that would run barefoot. So, I run ultra marathons now. Do I run barefoot? No, because I wouldn't last, 5Ks in the areas that we run. Unfortunately, my feet have become modernized, but I do understand the importance of being barefoot. So at home, the first thing I do is kick off my shoes. I hate, I'll be barefoot as much as I can. And I think it's a more natural way to be, allowing the toes to splay, allowing the bones, because I think 25% of all the bones in your body are actually in your feet. So it's we complex structure that we now squeeze and mold into, high heels and designer sneakers and that sort of stuff that don't work with the natural mechanics of the body.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. There's this guy Steven Jepson from neverleavetheplayground.com.
Okay.
He does a lot of juggling, hacky sack and things like that are like eye hand or eye foot coordination. But he also does a lot of barefoot on top of, like, balancing things. And he said one thing that he noticed was it seems to send a lot more information through the talus around the ankle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that actually leads to, in his opinion, higher levels of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis in the brain specifically that he was working with, which are
Wow.
people above the age of 65. Because he started training people above the age of 65, a really simple, interesting technique of picking up marbles with your toes while sitting
Yeah.
down, and then standing up and picking up marbles from a bucket. So you're only on one foot at that point, and then
Hmm.
putting the bucket on top of the chair you were just on. By the time it gets that easy, and he was noticing that people above the age of 65 were regaining their balance incredibly fast. But what he didn't expect was a lot of them with early onset, or maybe not even early onset, but dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, they started, and their wives started noticing a halting and sometimes even a reversal in at least the symptomology. It may not have appeared on a brain scan, but they're remembering things that they were, just lost before
Yeah.
that. So there's just this interesting thing going back to the intelligence in the body, that it seems like if you move in diverse ways and if you unstick some of the things that are stuck in the body, you can move in more diversity. And for some reason, that seems to translate into neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. And there's something that he said, as you see, he's walking on these rocks and stuff like that, mainly barefoot. Here
Yeah.
he's not. But the subtle ways that your foot has to contour around a rock and kind of fit the form to the shape of it, it's almost like working on the feet. So I would love to know, like, do you work on the feet a lot? Do you like get in there, the pads of the feet, and like work on that at all? And do you notice like maybe a universal kind of correction that you can establish just from there, the feet?
I do. My work, I can work pretty much viscerally, so into the organs of the body. And I do foot and ankle work um, if it's needed.
Mm,
A lot of the time, if you sort out the sort of the column of the body, right, which is spine and dural attachment sites, then other things come right.
mm.
As I said, I do footwork, but it's more symptomatic. So it's kind of like I call it fluffing. So it's for the client's benefit, right?
There
It's
you go.
just so that they think I'm actually
Jeez.
working on something, like if they've come
What
in
a
with
name.
plantar fasciitis or whatever it is, I'll work on the feet, so that they think, oh well, he's at least working in this particular area.
Yeah.
That's some loose
It
fluffing.
makes me wonder, because when you're on a table and you have your feet worked on, that's one thing. When all of your weight and your posture is stepping
Mm.
down and finding that through line of gravity, where like, where is my support structure? And so the entire foot has to grab around whatever like it's stepping on. That might be different than actually working on a foot on a table. Because for me, I have noticed that like if I'm feeling tight up around the neck, if
Mm.
I take a lacrosse ball and I start rolling it on my foot, but like kind
Yeah.
of like for a while, a couple minutes, I can feel some loosening up here. Now that might be a longer way to get the same thing. If I had somebody working on my back, but when I'm alone, I think I
Mm.
mentioned this to you before. I'm a nerd on the body, and I'm a nerd on self-care, but I never go out and have people work on my body, which is something I would like to get deeper into. So I
Mm.
found all these tricks, these self-care tricks, like rolling a
Yeah.
lacrosse ball, doing myofascial release while sitting down, finding a
Yeah.
sequence that's best to do it in if you're going to do a couple of spots.
Yeah.
One thing I would love to know from you though is like, do you send anybody home with like self-care tips and things that people can do kind of on the day to day other than walking? We already touched on that,
Mm.
but any self-care tips other than walking?
Look, I don't really work with exercises. The point of my work is to get the nervous system or the body back to its like original state of health, like
Baseline.
blueprints, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, So, I do tell people movement is your friend. So don't sit for long periods. If, like most people are stuck behind a laptop or some, device these days. And I tell them, get up, if you can make that call, walking around, do it, don't sit for long periods. Something else I say is water, hydration. Fascia needs to be hydrated to do its job. It orients water molecules in a very specific way. And so if fascia is dehydrated, it becomes thixotropic. So, if you visualize around each little muscle fiber, you have fascia. And so the sliding filament theory of muscle, when a muscle contracts, the fibers slide over one another, and when it relaxes, it kind of pulls apart. The fascia allows that gliding motion. So if you're dehydrated, or your fascia is brittle, or and fascia becomes, then it's thixotropic. It can be emotional states that create that. It doesn't have to be, physical dehydration. So, I say to people, water, if they don't drink. I treat people that don't drink water at all. And to me, that's quite strange. But I guess, there's different people. And, generally, I'll try to explain to them, if you flare, because sometimes in the body's attempt to reestablish homeostasis, shifting between sympathetic and parasympathetic states, we can feel a bit shitty, tired, flat, detoxy. Sometimes, emotional things pop up. People are teary, or, and I just try to explain it's just the body letting go. It's just you processing things. It's like stirring up the mud at the bottom of a clear pond. It's murky for a bit, but it will settle, and generally, people just feel better, but you do get the odd one. But I tell everyone, just be aware. If you do find you're not feeling great, it settles. It's not I haven't made you worse. All my words that I use.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed that a lot, especially even in detoxing. This started way back before I even started getting nerdy about these things. But this, the hair of the dog, drink a beer when you have a hangover, it helps, right? Well, what does it do? It stops the detox process. So the detox process feels shitty because you drank too much, right?
Yeah.
And so that's almost like a necessary pain you need to go through, and drinking the beer just stops the process of detoxing. That's a really simplified way of looking at it, but sometimes I feel, and this is, I wouldn't even say it's a theory of mine, it's a working hypothesis maybe of, so in Wim Hof's work, his breath technique, it decouples the pain protein. So you can get in an ice bath and it'll still feel cold, but the pain won't be as heavy because the breathing technique decouples the pain proteins. I feel like those pain proteins can get somewhat stuck maybe in the waters. I don't know if it's in the fascia, but when I hear of myofascial release or even just extreme relaxation all of a sudden, and somebody can get emotional, I feel a couple things are likely going on. One is that they haven't felt a relief from a certain degree of tension for a while, and just feeling that relaxation takes you from this space where your inner knowing is, I don't have the bandwidth or the energy to deal with this emotional component. And then when you relax and your bandwidth opens up, it's like, well, now would be the time to cry, right? Now would be the time for this to come out. And sometimes we can associate it with a specific moment in our life. I don't even know if that needs to really be there. I think sometimes just the crying, or just that, because if you think of crying and laughing, it's this breathing interrupt as well. It's this thing that, like, it's causing you to kind of like go through these rapid fluctuations around the diaphragm, and breathing, exercises are known to relax the fascia. I find that
Definitely.
super, yeah. And the one thing about hydration, have you heard of Eldoa?
No.
You should check out Eldoa, because basically it's just, I think there's seven movements, and they're specific, not even movements, they're poses. So it's ELDOA, Eldoa. The guy, I think I might even interview him next month. But these are basically working with the myofascial system specifically to move water through them. So like the point of it is to kind of imagine you're wringing out your fascia like a towel to
Yeah.
move water, because then once it relaxes again, it drinks, it's like thirsty, it drinks in new water. So they're really big sticklers on hydration, because they notice that your body will not, if you're not properly hydrated, and being properly hydrated doesn't mean like once a day drink half a gallon of water. It means drinking it at the right times, and also structured water. I don't know if you've gotten into unstructured water, can't even enter the cells very easily. And structured water, like distilled water, has hard time actually entering the cells because there's
Yeah.
no structure to it. And structure almost seems like memory in a sense. So there's something about Eldoa that I think is really interesting. I'd love for you to like look into that. Maybe we could talk down the line.
Yeah,
But
definitely. I'll love stuff like that.
you know, hydration super super important. Is there anything else that you find are like common offenders? You've worked on people for 17 years now, 16 years, 10 years
Mm.
professionally. You were doing it
Yeah.
part-time for a while. So that's a lot of hands-on training. Like, what are some other through lines, if there's anything else? I know that you've worked on people from, what was it, 36 hours old, like
Mm.
right out the womb.
Yeah, my oldest has been 94.
Old, wow, 36 hours to
Mm.
94 years. I would
Yeah.
love to know. And I don't know if there's, I mean, if you want to steer that in a specific direction, but like you've worked on bodies for 17 years, ranging from 36 hours to 94 years old. Are like, for one, like what was it about the 36-hour-old child that maybe needed some work, or maybe the mom just wanted
Mm.
some work? Explain a little bit of that to me.
Sure. So this little guy, he was the fourth out of in the family, and I treated the mom and dad, the extended family, and all of the kids. So there wasn't anything too badly wrong with him. They just brought him to me to make sure, things were moving like they should, for lack of a better term. But when I treat little guys like that, it's generally there's some sort of birth trauma. Either they prem. It's just their nervous system is stuck in a sympathetic state. And so they won't sleep, they cry all the time, they got really bad colic. I'd say colic is predominantly what I treat in like babies that young, or even if they won't latch, the suckling reflex, I think, develops in the 8.5 months. And so if you bring a baby out before then, sometimes they battle. That reflex isn't fully developed. So,
Okay.
it's just about stimulating, a lot of jaw work, the nerves, the trigeminal nerve, a couple of those. So again, a large majority of the little ones I treat are for colic or babies that won't settle, and it's just a nervous system that their first experience of life has been one of shock or trauma. They've come into the world not calm and like, oh God, this is amazing. This is my, here I am. It's a case of, well, here I am. I'm fighting for my life in whatever context that is,
Yeah.
So it's just about tipping the nervous system back into a parasympathetic state, because 80% of your functioning is autonomic. You don't think about it, right? Your digestion, heart rate, blood pressure, hormones, neurochemistry, all of the stuff happens without you consciously thinking about it. The problem is that autonomic nervous system is optimized in a parasympathetic state. So when we calm and relaxed, the autonomic nervous system works exactly like it should. When we move into a sympathetic state, so we go into fight or flight, that part of the nervous system kind of down regulates to keep you in this heightened state of fight or flight, because it needs to keep you alive. So, it's when I treat things like fertility, if I'm working with a couple who are battling to conceive, I try to explain to them, like, your body's responding like it doesn't want to hold a child. It's responding like you fighting, there's a lion chasing you, for lack of a better term. So you've got to tip the nervous system back into a parasympathetic state. The hormones then start to work, autonomic nervous system becomes optimized, and you return back to your original blueprint of health, where everything works like it should.
That's so fascinating. There's a couple things that come up for me there. And that's like mentioning that even at 36 hours old, there is especially and I can't pretend that I've been around for tons of generations and I know how like pregnancy and birth has always been done, but I've heard stories of women in Africa walking miles to a clinic, have their baby, and then walk home from the
Walk
clinic.
home.
In the Western world, that's like, no, you need to stay in the hospital for 36 hours. You need to be laying down, resting. And I'm not saying that there's nothing to that. But the interesting thing is that something has happened to giving birth
Well,
in
someone needs to make money, right? So you've got to
right.
be in hospital for 3 days.
And the idea of laying on your back and your
Mm.
feet up in stirrups is 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 that natural to the mom about to give birth, or is that
No,
the easiest way for the doctor
the
to
doctor.
have a
Yeah,
baby
sure.
delivered straight into the doctor's hands? So it's beneficial for the doctor, it seems. And
Sure.
that could possibly cause, for a lot of, even what my wife has helped some people get over, their anxiety of having birth, and just teaching them, like, your body was made for this. Don't let stories that you've heard
Yeah.
about horror stories and anxiety in movies where they're screaming and sweat and then the mom almost dies afterwards. Like that's sensationalism. Your body knows how to do this, which, is almost treading on, like, your body has ancient wisdom. We should
Yeah.
listen to it. We should consult with the body more than allow for our intellects to run what we think is normal in the body. And to just land on the point that children at age 36 hours, or not even, Stan Groff called it the perinatal matrices, where he was dealing with people doing breath work and holotropic breath work, and they were having these experiences that he says, this seems like you're going through the birth canal. And it
Yeah.
almost seems like something about their nervous system, they didn't have a Sean Johnson working on them at age 36 hours, so something stuck around, it almost seems, in their
It
nervous system.
100%. The body heals, the nervous system doesn't forget. That's I
Body
use
keeps
that line
score.
often
Wow.
in clinic. So yes, you can have a car accident, um, and break a couple of bones. They heal. You kind of gone on. You kind of get over it, but the nervous system doesn't forget that trauma unless you do something to release it, right? To work out of it. I've been helping a lady with a knee. She had knee surgery, and it didn't quite go according to plan. But before she came to see me, she went back, and it wouldn't flex, right? So they just couldn't get the knee to bend, and they put her out, and they forced the knee to bend. And she was saying, even though she was out, her whole body, her hands were actually clenching from them forcing the knee. So consciously she's not there, but there's an intelligence that's seeing everything all the time in that body that doesn't sleep or doesn't black out. So perhaps your ego blacks out, but
Physical
there's an intelligence there that remembers these things. And I haven't, it's hopefully in a book I'll write one day, but in February, I did a ultra marathon across the Tankwa Desert here in South Africa. And at about 84 kilometers, I was running. It's like 47 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's a lot. And my whole left side of my body kind of started to distort. It was doing its own thing. And it was literally, I knew, and I spoke to a friend about it afterwards, who's also a runner, and he said, well, how did you know it was your birth process? And I said, I can't explain it, but I just know it was my birth process. My whole left side of my body almost pulled in its own direction. I stopped, I walked, and I was just like, all I said to myself was, and so this is 84 kilometers. It's very hot. I've been awake for almost 36 hours now. My language to myself in my head was, slit its throat and let it die here on the road. And, this is my very primal, like, hurt. This is what's going on inside my head. Yeah. And, I can't explain it, but that was my experience. And whether it's, subjective, it probably is. But I've seen enough, I'll give you an example. When I just started work, and I mean, I think this was my first year of like full-time clinical work. I had a lady come to me with back pain, and she was a Russian lady, and I, I treated her, and she came back the following week, and the results weren't quite what I wanted, but her lower back, her psoas was, I mean, it was literally like a concrete wall. And I said to her, look, she could speak English, but it wasn't fluent. I asked, had she been through any trauma, what she said. Look, when she was 4, her parents divorced, but her uncle stepped into that fatherly role. She said she has zero trauma from that event in her life. Nothing. So I was like, oh, okay, it can't be that then if she's saying that. And I said, and what was your birth process like? And she said, oh, yeah, I died and they resuscitated me.
It's a big tidbit to leave out.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I
Bury
get
the
all the
lead.
time, I'll be treating someone and they'll tell me this and this, and I've got a history. And then I'll have a look on their shins and they've got the classic, they've had a heart bypass. They've taken the veins out of their legs, and they don't tell me that. I just see the scars, and then I'll ask and they'll go, yeah, I've had, quadruple heart bypass. And I kind of go, I think that's important to tell me and to let me know. But anyway, this lady, I said to her, look, your first kind of life experience sets the nervous system, the tone of the nervous system pretty much for your life, unless you do something to change it. And she said she had always been highly strung, battle with anxiety, a typical type A personality. And I treated her, and she came back for a third session, and perhaps it was just creating that link between what happened and she was like a completely different person. She said, I just feel different, everything, and so perhaps she would have got those results without me asking those questions and kind of joining the dots together. But I, in my experience, I doubt it. But just shows, it's so, vital, I think, to even, I also take babies to chiropractors. It's just to down regulate that stress response in them, because they've come from a place that was pretty much utopia into a world that's now, separation, and it's colder, you don't have food on tap, it's different. The world is different. And if you can help that transition, I think it plays and it serves them for the rest of their life. Most little kids that come in to me, and they've got the diagnosis of ADD, or they got concentration problems, or they won't sleep. There is some form of birth trauma, abuse, neglect, something like that has just set their nervous system off in a sympathetic state. And the great thing about working with kids is their prefrontal cortex isn't developed, so their egos are not as strongly entrenched as yours and mine are, and so they just want to express health. Their ego isn't attached to their blights and their pain and all of that. So working with kids is amazing because it's minimal input for like maximum results. They come in and they come right like that. It's amazing. Where adults, it's like pushing a boulder up a hill sometimes.
Like you said something that really made me think of the fact that when you say setting the nervous system on the right tone or the right note, getting it going to what would be called tuned in harmony. It just feels like if you come into this world with let's say a difficult birthing process, and then you never have somebody bringing or find a way for you to do it yourself to find that baseline, it's almost like you never heard the guitar perfectly tuned. You've only heard the guitar out of tune. And
100%,
you know what it,
yeah.
you know the reference point, what an almost tuned guitar sounds like. But until you get back to baseline, it almost seems like the longer you go because the children don't have the stories, as deeply
Sure.
entrenched. So we have these stories, and that's what's so fascinating to me about the stories that you were saying. You see the removed veins, you see the the surgery and stuff like that, and it's stuff that they never told you. Why? Because for some reason it wasn't a part of the story that they held on to. And so
Sure.
you can have conflicting stories, like, oh, my instrument's perfectly tuned. It's just like, actually, no, you've never heard it perfectly tuned. You've never heard what it sounds like in perfect baseline. So I love what you're mentioning there, because it really does feel like if you can introduce that that neutral, what is harmonious, what is balance. I worked with Naudi Aguilar from Functional Patterns, and he was just working with me for an hour on just finding neutral posture. And I like, to me, I couldn't really tell the difference. He was making these minor adjustments and saying, like, now suck in your gut a little bit more, do this, do that. And then he was just like, like, you're just going to sweat a lot for the next couple minutes, but, like, don't worry, we're making neuromyofascial associations. Like, your body has forgotten where neutrality is. It forgot how to balance itself. So just reminding it by bringing it there, and just, okay, stay present. That's it. And I've had to do that when I try and meditate, and I notice, like, oh, I think my spine is straight, but I've actually just relaxed down into that hyperkyphosis. I need to remind my body, oh, this is neutral. That's what that feels like. So as you can see on the screen there, that the out of alignment backs, that's a story. To me, that is a story right there.
See, your posture, we think of posture as kind of only physically driven, but it's an accumulation of your thought processes, the emotions you feel, your habits, karmic lineage. There's all of these things that are built into your posture, and it's dynamic. It's never constant.
Yeah.
And so, people come into clinic and, I'll test and they say, oh, am I out again? And I go, yes, but I expect you to be out. You're a human being. You are thinking, you are feeling, you are experiencing. All of this stuff changes your posture. And so, it's constant work, I would say. And if you can create that postural change, I spoke earlier about the Shungalola, from like flexion to extension, you create that state shift in the nervous system. So there are ways to calm yourself down physically, even if you're very mentally anxious. And so it seems like the stuff you were showing me there is, a really good way to do that.
So I got this question. You mentioned that you don't send people home with exercises or anything. What do you do for yourself? How do you keep yourself in baseline?
I go for treatment.
Okay, good. That's good to know.
So and I've only, where are we now? It's almost December. So towards the end of last year, I made a concerted effort. Unfortunately with me, I'm bent over a bed all day. I battle with my neck and my jaw, and it's simply because my posture is one of flexion. I'm kind of, and it, when you're tuning into a body, it's, I don't like to break that tuning in by thinking, oh, where am I in space now?
Yeah.
So I'm consistently, I go once a week, roughly once a week. There are exceptions where I skip, but I go to be worked on or adjusted. And outside of my work, I go to people who do other things, because otherwise I'm constantly assessing what's going on
I can imagine.
when I'm being worked on. So if I go to someone who does something different to me, at least it gives my conscious mind a chance to just go, okay, well, lie back, relax, and let the process go, as opposed to trying to think what's going on. That's it. Being consciously engaged. Because the thing with Bowen therapy, we use pauses in the work. So we'll work a bit, it's really light touch, and then you actually, in yoga, there's a pose called Shavasana. I think it's corpse pose, where you, between postures, you just lie on the ground and you absorb the benefit of the posture. you know,
Yeah.
that ancient wisdom, there's science to it. And so we use a therapeutic pause with Bowen therapy, where if I've I can't say adjust, but if I've addressed something in the body that I think is problematic, I take a pause, because it then allows the nervous system. It's a process called interoception,
Yeah.
where the nervous system becomes aware of its own internal processes. So it allows the nervous system a chance to respond. And I can come back and check, okay, this is feeling much better. Great. Either, we've got what we need, or let's see if there's something else that the body needs. So, yeah, it just, those pauses allow for that sort of postural integration.
It's interesting. I was just listening to Alan Watts as he was talking about metaphysics, and he was talking about, it's like every wave has a peak and a trough. You'll never see a peak devoid of a trough. You'll never see a trough devoid of a peak. And it comes up above the horizon. Now you see it, now you don't. Now you see it, now you don't. And what we think of as sound, like if you hear somebody just laying on a synthesizer note, it seems to our conscious mind that it's pure sound, but actually it's intervals between sound and silence. And that's what all vibration is. So when you're even mentioning, because yoga, it includes more than just shavasana. Usually shavasana is at the end, but let's say
Yes. Okay.
kundalini yoga, like you're doing this root rock, or
Okay.
like grinding this, just moving the spine. After every exercise, they say, now just sit still in meditative pose and just feel what that feels like. Your body just went through a process. Now feel what that feels like. It also sounds like the reason why we don't just eat nonstop all day long, right? You have a period of eating, and then you have a period of integrating it into your body. And the same thing goes for, day and night. Like you have an active period, and then you have a dormant period. So that there's there's some wisdom to that you were just mentioning, that I think is really key. Because even if you're fasting, you're resetting your digestion. Like it's kind of a reset, it's a pause. And then what's really important is like coming back onto your diet. Like, okay, what are you going to reintroduce the new pattern? So curious, as people are getting up off the table with you and they're about to leave, what do you send them home with any, like, just here's some tips, here's what you might experience? You've mentioned a couple of it, but as far as like, okay, you're going to want to make sure to hydrate, take it easy, try and sleep as well as you can tonight. Because
Yeah.
that seems like the resetting period.
It is, if I work with athletes, I'll always just try to say to them, look, if you cannot train today, that'll be great, because is always, there's stimulation, and then there's integration, and the body needs time. So I treat people once a week. Other therapists might say, oh, come back in 2 days, come back in 3 days, whatever it is. I want stimulation in treatment, and then I want integration for as long as the body needs integration before I try to stimulate that again. The exceptions to the rule. If I'm treating a pregnant woman, I can treat a pregnant woman hourly, let's say, because as the baby moves, her body will adapt and adjust. But generally once a week, and it's simply for that that germination, giving the time. We've put seeds into the ground, into the body. Now it's time for the nervous system to respond. Your nervous system it's evolved through millions of years, right? It knows what to do. I just like to think I help people get out of their own way. I just, facilitate a process. I nudge the body in the right direction, and the nervous system knows what it's doing. It just unravels what it needs to unravel, and it's got to have the time for that. It's just like you've mentioned the cycles. We live in a very, the nature of our reality is dualistic. So, black, white, in, out, up, down, and we oscillate between these states. And so it's the same, even with training. When I chat to athletes, I always say it's better to undertrain than overtrain. You can't train 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like, you can't keep force feeding yourself every minute of the day. we need to, just like that sound wave, we need all aspects of life, good and bad. I think we're a little bit off topic here, but I think this is the problem in society. We've been kind of lied to and said, oh, you must be happy all the time. And you can't be happy all the time. It's a lie, just as your peak happiness, you can, put money on it, that round the corner, there's a trough that you're going to go into in terms of your mental well-being or mental state. And it's a sort of cycle you have to ride, and I think, the Buddha said it best: life is suffering, and suffering ends when sort of attachment to one side or one sort of extreme is let go of. So
it's wanting the one way without its counterpart, right?
sure.
It's like saying I want only daytime, and there's definitely a difference between pain and suffering.
Without a
Pain,
doubt.
I think pain is really a part of life. Suffering is when we wallow and can't let go of, like, let's say, a certain aspect of the significance that we apply to the pain. Like, this is mine. It's part of my story. And suffering ensues when, I believe, when we could give up the pain, when we could move past it, but we're holding on to something. Like, there's a part of the lesson we haven't gotten yet, and we think that it's afflicting us when really we're holding on to it. I've found, and I feel that, like, I wouldn't say we got too far off topic, because really the main reason why I wanted to chat with you and go into these points of the conversation today is there's this baseline that especially the Western world has of what is health and what is healing. And most people, it might sound like common sense, but they don't know how to put it into practice, that, like, your body heals. Your body knows how to heal. So if it's not healing, there's some way that you are impeding that progress, or something in your environment, which is also you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you can't live without the environment, then it's just a fancy way of looking at us, thinking that I am this thing and that's that thing, but you can't live without it. It is one system, but in this dual world, as you were saying, like, this is just how we break things down. We're at a certain level of our evolved consciousness collectively. I feel like what you're offering and working with the body, this will kind of be, wrapping it up, so you can go as philosophical or whatever as you want with this. But as I think this is the future of healing. So I hear a lot of people saying that frequency-based medicine is the future, and yes, that's the technologically driven future of medicine, I believe. But I think the real way back to health is not abandoning the old by rocketing into the future, but acknowledging that our body has gone through evolution. Like, our mind, it resets itself every single. Let's say there is reincarnation. Every single time you enter a new body, you're kind of like a reset mind. So you got to learn all over again. But your body comes from generation after generation after generation. It's dealt with stressors that we couldn't even imagine. So I guess to wrap this into a question would be, what are your thoughts on how we listen to our own body? Like, touching into the intuition, like acknowledging that there are stories that we tell ourselves, but, like, being open for communicating with your body. Like, I don't want to go so cheesy as to say, like, to ask, how do we ask our body questions and things like that? But what are your thoughts on finding ways to become more in tune with our body, so we know how to step out of the way of our own healing?
Definitely. I think, to be fair, we've, Einstein said there's, space-time is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. Okay, so there's no real separation between anything. Everything just exists in one sort of quantum soup, if you want to say that. So, we have this nervous system. We've evolved as sort of Homo sapiens as a sort of hunter-gatherer tribe. And when I talk, I always use this really basic analogy. If I, and I was a decent IT engineer, and I could put it into its component parts, I could put it back together, and the computer should turn on, right? But what happens if I did that to a human being? If I, separated you, Ben, and I separated your organs and all that, and I put you back together, if I thought I was a decent surgeon, in a more Frankenstein sense, you're not going to turn back on, right? So there's this, there's something very unique about life, and you can, doesn't matter who you are. If you're a Christian, you call it a soul. Might call it Brahman if you were Hindu. Science would call it energy. If you're a Jedi Knight, you'd call it the Force, right? Because there's an energy within you that makes you unique, right? And so this energy needs very basic things. So things like movement, exposure to sunlight, organic food, close, are we living that way? Are we giving that energy those things? No. What do we do today? Don't kiss or hug, don't touch. Don't, we eat food that looks like food but has zero, nourishment for us. Our water that we drink is not water. We live under fluorescent lights, and then we wonder why we are our nervous system is generating symptoms as a result of, it's like putting diesel in a petrol engine. It's
Right.
just, it's not going to mix, right? And so to be honest, I think our ancestors lived very differently in tribes. I think they were less, and that allowed them to communicate with their environment, and I think science would look back on these ways and go, oh, it's rubbish, but tribal people live very differently to how we live. And I think they had a better understanding of their bodies because there wasn't so much noise in the world, that they lived these, like, they moved around, they traveled a lot, they weren't stuck, behind a desk. And I think if we start to apply those things differently, so get out in nature, get your shoes off, right? Not get rid of your devices, but limit exposure to, like absolute, like, there's some real rubbish out on the internet, I would say the majority of it's rubbish. But if you limit your exposure to that, you naturally become more aware of your own sort of internal process. If you give your body a chance to talk to you, and also I don't mean to be cheesy, but it does. There's this, there's a feedback, there's a communication. If I'm battling with something, my wife will go, well, what's causing it? And I go, I don't know. She says, but you do this all day, every day. In clinic, you helping other people, you need to turn that awareness in on yourself. And it's difficult to do. But if you create the environment where you can, then things, my daughter, she's 5. She went to the doctor for the first time on Monday, the homeopathic doctor, not the normal doctor. But we trust that, and perhaps I shouldn't because I'm not a doctor, but my wife and I, we trust our ability to know when a child needs to go and be put on antibiotics. She's never been on antibiotics. We have this, you mentioned earlier, just, your wife was saying the woman's body knows how to give birth. What we've done is we've transferred our sort of responsibility to experts, professionals. Yeah. And so it's simply a decision: create the environment and trust yourself. Trust you have a nervous system that's evolved through millions of years. It knows what to do. Create the environment for it to flourish, and then it won't be a problem. If you it's kind of what I do. If I'm battling with my back or my neck, and I think it's non-physical, I kind of go, okay, well, where am I? Have I had a really rough week? Did this client's story really upset me? Did it trigger something in myself that I haven't, So I'll ask these sort of inquiring questions, and if I feel that it might be, I kind of go, okay, well, perhaps it's that, and if I can join those dots again, things tend to resolve themselves, or I go for a walk, or I find now with running, that movement the whole time, I tend to have less back pain. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but less back pain and less neck issues because I'm constantly moving that fascia, right, when I get up and run in the morning. So, sorry, it's a long answer to your question, but create that environment, trust yourself, you know what's best for you. And again, we listen to authorities on social media and in life, and it's simply, I always say to people, don't forget, if someone is selling you something, they generally have a product that they're trying to push on you. So yes, you might need this, but do you really? If someone says to you, Sean, I'm sorry, we're going to have to amputate your leg, is that necessary, or am I paying for a surgeon's beach house? I've got to trust that I can make my own decisions, in terms of my health. And please, I'm not saying, don't go to doctors or whatever. There's always, if you've got a gunshot wound, don't go for acupuncture.
Yeah.
You get to the hospital, but you should know that, I would hope. So yeah, create that environment, trust yourself. Again, your body knows how to self-regulate. Just get out of your own way.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, I heard a lot of the word trust. And I think one reason why I really appreciate that is because, you trust your intuition, and your intuition, if you got a gunshot wound, will tell you to go to the doctor, not for acupuncture, right?
Yeah.
And there's something about this where there's this fear tactic in society that I'm not even going to say it comes from any one particular industry or anything. I think we self-regulate each other with this fear that is like, if something's not working, not working, then we swing to the opposite end of the
Yeah.
extreme. And what you're saying is just like, no, don't throw away the option of going to the doctor. Just start introducing, like, microdose on some trust for your intuition. Like, instead of immediately calling the doctor and ruling out that you need to engage with your own body at all, take a moment and introduce a little bit of communicating, to put it to the test. Do you have intuition? Do you know how to communicate intuitively with your body? Does your body have anything it could teach you if you were to just sit, like, when you were mentioning, like, create the right environment? Well, a child knows when you're really paying attention, or if you're
Yeah.
answering their questions but still scrolling through Instagram, right?
100%.
They just know. So how do they know? They're so young and so naive, right? No, like, we all come with this radical intelligence, and then we build stories on top of it. And I'd say that the only difference between children, and adults in this one specific respect is we've become so intellectually sophisticated we can lie to each other, and it works. But with children, they see it on your face. They're like, all right, I'm just going to let you believe what's coming out of your mouth, but I know the truth of it.
Sure. It's because kids speak energy.
Yeah. And that energy comes out in posture. It comes out in facial expressions. And look, a dog, if you go like this to a dog, right, it's going to know what you intend. If you get into that
100%.
crouched position, like I'm about to pounce, they know that's a word to them. And that's like,
Yes.
that's like attack, right? So they get it. We get it. And there is an intuition. This is a language older than the actual, like, language that we're speaking, like English or whatever it might be. It operates in a different part of the brain. So with that being said, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, is the intelligence of the body, how to get right with it, and the simplicity of instead of going for gadgets, instead of like, oh, well, I heard there's some red light therapy with some AI algorithm, blah, 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 and you just stick it on your head for, and I'm not knocking any of the biohacking community or anything like that, but it's like, go to that extreme if you've started with the simple basics. If you haven't started with the simple basics, leave biohacking, like go to arithmetic before you go to calculus, right? Start with the basics. And I feel like that's really what you're mentioning here is there's an intelligence. And if you just allow the spine some neutrality and the body some recovery time, and you create the conditions, like you're not going to force a seed in the ground to grow. You set the conditions and it will do it. I feel like that seed is an analogy for how we come to heal, and setting the conditions is like, well, maybe I'm not going to train today. Maybe I'm not going to let my coach calling me a pussy make me get up there and try and, run 120K without a tire, right?
Yeah.
I think
No,
that's
sure.
that's the main keys that I'm picking up on here. And I guess I just kind of want to round this out by saying, like, is there anything that you are excited about moving into from here now that you got 17 years of the basics and hands-on with clients? Is there something that you feel like is the next part of the journey for you?
Oh, look, the journey is constantly evolving. I teach what I do, but on a I haven't taught for a while on a big scale. So I'm hoping to kind of get more into teaching Bowen therapy, and so that we can spread it. I just think if everyone understood how the body functions, if everyone understood the role of fascia in the body, how it's this crystalline liquid matrix, and how consciousness is affecting it, in terms of family dynamics, how society treated each other. So I'd love to, kind of just on a personal level, teach maybe a little bit more. But again, I would want people to understand the more holistic functioning of what they are, because, we live in a very mechanistic world. We're being treated like bits of machinery, cogs in a machine. And this is why we're having the issues we're having, health issues, because we are running our bodies like machinery as opposed to this, like, I mentioned, a bioenergetic being. And I think if people kind of took a step back and went, you know what, if I drop dead at my desk, they're just going to, kick me out the chair and someone else will come into that role in whatever I'm doing. Yeah, I would, excuse, the holistic nature of life and how we are part of this ecosystem. I think life would be a lot easier for people, And at the end of the day, that's really what we want. We want to live a happy life, uncomplicated and I haven't got quite figured out yet. I don't know what's happening when I leave this place. If I got one shot, I want it to be a good one, and I want it to be happy. I don't want to be stuck, making money for some random company just to pay bills for stuff I don't really want, Yeah. So again, I wish people would be a bit more in touch, in tune with themselves, because I think a lot of our health issues would kind of disappear. We'd address them.
Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate the fact that you're mentioning teaching. I think teaching is the very obvious next role. Once you've learned something, once you've mastered it, teaching others is I've studied secret societies in the past, and even all the way to the military. Everything operates in this tiered structure. You come in as a neophyte, then you're a journeyman. There's less gendered terminology as well, but then journeyman and then a master. And the journeyman is still learning from the master while helping teach the neophyte. And the master is teaching both the journeyman and the neophyte. So really, it's like this torus. Like, you're led up towards the top, and before you retire or die or whatever it might be, you're bringing people up into what you've learned, and you're passing on the wisdom to younger generations. And so I think that's really brilliant. I appreciate the fact that that's what you're looking to do. I also, I'm excited to see what a world would look like if we were far more in touch and in tune with ourselves and trusted ourselves and trusted that intuition inside us, but also entrusted our community, our friends and family, the ones who spend a lot of time looking at us, hearing our gripes, all that kind of stuff, rather than just going to a doctor that's going to look at us for 7 minutes, maybe not even look at us, only look at his paper while talking to us, and think that person has the best insight as to what I should do because they learned this curriculum, So with that being said, man, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time. We really covered a lot of ground. I don't know. I mean, you're probably pretty set there in South Africa, but if you find yourself making it across to the United States, you definitely have to let me know.
I will definitely.
Yeah, I'm interested in looking deeper into Bowen therapy now as well. And please just keep in touch. And I appreciate you're doing work that I definitely find is going to be the next path for me, which is a lot more hands-on. As you can see, this is your Instagram page, ladies and gentlemen. Go check out his Instagram page, Sean Johnson _ what was that? Structural alignment?
Medicine.
Structural
medicine.
Okay. Go check this out. I mean, this is deep, and this is really, again, your body is the teacher that you should be learning from. It doesn't mean you can't have teachers outside of yourself, but your body itself is a teacher. And the more you learn that there are nuanced ways of listening to the body, I think that's when our trust really starts to go through the roof, because we realize, oh, this is the voice that's always been speaking. It's always here, So, thank you, man. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I've had a really, really good conversation. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Johnson, please check out his website, check out Bowen Therapy, and just go back through and listen to this. I mean, I feel like there was a lot of little tidbits that could be mined for a whole episode on themselves. It's really important to understand that your body is that one thing that you carry with you all your life. It doesn't matter, with where you go, what you feed it. It's responding to all those things, but it's the one thing that you really want to. It's your teacher. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Gordon and I try to bring you this quality conversation every single Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I appreciate you all for consistently coming out, checking out the guests that we have. Please go into the show notes. You can see Sean Johnson's website, Instagram, all the information you need. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy the holidays coming up. Much love, and I'll catch y'all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.